Because I'm about to show you a lot of things that you can do with brushes in Photoshop, but mainly this is about how to find brushes that already exist and download them, use them for texture purposes mainly. So the first thing we're going to do is go onto a browser and search for some Photoshop texture brushes. And you're going to find thousands of them out there, and I'll give you some links to some of my favorite sites. But for this example, I'm just pulling up one of them that's giving us some different texture brush packs, and this one is like a kind of a subtle rust, and you can see that there's a bunch of variations when you blend them together. And then you have to find the download link, which can sometimes be a challenge because it takes you to fake downloads, but in this case it's a zip, and I'm clicking on it to unzip the files because they save space that way, so you're not downloading the original bulk of the file, you're getting a zip. And once that's done, you're going to find the ABR, that's the brush file, Adobe Photoshop brush file, and then you're going to need to find another window, a Finder window, and in there you're going to navigate to Applications, Adobe Photoshop, and then go into Plugins, or Presets, excuse me, Presets, Brushes. You'll see there's a bunch of other ABRs that are already there, and then all you have to do is drag that ABR file into the brush presets. It has to be in that brush folder under presets. Now that it's there, we're going to open up Photoshop, and you can see Abe is still here. And you're going to open up the brush options once you're in the brush tool and say load brushes. It's going to bring up the Finder window, and you're going to go to the same place again, Applications, Adobe Photoshop, Presets, Brushes, and then find the file name that you downloaded and hit open. Usually it'll ask you if you want to append, and that means you're adding it to the brushes you already have, or you could just say OK, which replaces all the other ones. In this case, it didn't even ask, it just went ahead and put it with all the other brushes. You can see here the rust has lots of different textures, and there's different levels of opacity in that brush, which is kind of hard to tell just looking at it this way. And what I've done is I have a layer where I put a layer mask onto a color overlay with the pennies, and I'm just going to change it to black, or not, or create a clipping mask and just start painting. Here we go. So you can see that the texture brushes do exactly that. A lot of times they already have presets where they scatter, they change and flip sides, they change their velocity or value and flip on the different axes as you paint with it. And so you really just have to play around with them and see what they can do. That's part of downloading brushes, is kind of figuring out what you can and cannot do with them. And then you can always tweak and adjust them as you see needed. So here I'm going to use some more textures and play around with the color overlay, and I'm actually going to fill it with the solid, or make a new layer. Make a new layer, hit fill, and I'm going to fill it with a solid. So I'm covering over my background, and I'm going to kind of choose that cream color from his jacket, say OK. And then with that texture brush, I'm going to put on let me find some different textures. There we go. I'm going to do a layer mask, and then with that gray, I'm going to, in just a 21% opacity, I'm just going to keep clicking on it, and that'll make it very random and start showing the background through that colored layer. Let me try a different one. And so you can keep playing with them over and over again, trying different texture brushes on top of each other, and just see what kind of textures you can create inside of Photoshop. And texture brushes are just great for giving that tactile quality so that your artwork doesn't seem too digital. Here I have another texture brush that I'm using. It's kind of a round, so I'm going to do a sort of vignette effect in the background. Here I have a texture brush and I've made a new layer, and I've got a blue color that I chose from the jacket. It's kind of like an old painted wood stroke, and I'm just layering that in the background so you can actually paint colors. Just keep the opacity low and the flow low so that you still have a texture quality. Otherwise it's too solid and it just seems like you brought in some texture clip art. Here I'm going to actually show you how to use the texture brush to bring an image into a picture without it being like a clipped edge. So I'm going to take Abraham Lincoln, and he is on a group, a folder over there on the right, you can see, and I'm going to hold down Alt and click on the layer mask. So Abe just disappeared, but he's in that mask with black, and now I'm just going to use white with this texture brush and start painting him in. So a lot of times when you want images to appear dreamlike or surreal, the way to do it is put them in Photoshop, but then group all the effects in the image together, put a black layer mask on them, which is just Alt, click on layer mask, and then use a texture brush to start painting it in. And you can even use the edges of that brush. So I'm just staying in one place and clicking several times to make Abe suddenly appear. Changing up some of the textures so they don't seem too steadily available. And then here is a great brush trick. So this has a really cool pattern to it, but it's the wrong direction. So if I click over there on the brushes palette, I can change the direction of the brush right there. So I made it 180-degree rotation, and on a blank layer I'm going to choose a red, and I'm just going to stamp it to create that texture in my painting, and just holding it steady, just clicking it several times until I get it to the level I want. And there, that added a nice transition from the base into the background. So this is just giving you some ideas of the ways you can use brushes. There's too many to even go over in one tutorial, but hopefully you will just download some texture brushes and play with them with your Abe or with any other project you're working with and see what you can come up with. Good luck.